Imagine stepping out of a subway station in New York City, but this isn't the New York you know today. There are no giant digital screens, no smartphones, no luxury stores glowing beneath endless LED lights. Instead, you see flickering neon signs, yellow taxis, graffiti covered walls, and crowds rushing through noisy streets. A car horn blasts, a subway train screeches underground, a radio plays from an apartment window, and somewhere in the distance, you hear a siren. It's 1984. Welcome to New York City. A city loud, rough, unpredictable, creative, and unforgettable. This is New York in the 1980s. And for the next few minutes, we're going back. The first thing you'd notice was the noise. New York was almost never quiet. Cars honked. Street vendors shouted. Subway trains roared beneath the streets. Music came from stores, apartments, cars, and portable boomboxes. Everywhere you looked, people were moving. Workers rushing to their jobs. Students heading to school. Taxi drivers searching for passengers. Tourists trying to find their way. But underneath all that energy was a city facing serious problems. Some neighborhoods struggled with poverty and neglect. Buildings had peeling paint, graffiti-covered walls, and subway trains. Crime was a major concern in many areas, yet New York still had something special. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was alive, and that energy was impossible to ignore. Now, walk toward Times Square. Today, Times Square is famous for massive digital screens and millions of tourists. But in the 1980s, it looked and felt very different. Neon signs flickered above crowded sidewalks. Movie theaters advertised new films. Yellow taxis pushed through traffic. Street vendors sold food. Huge billboards competed for your attention. Times Square was exciting, but it also had an edge. Adult businesses, street activity, and crime gave the area a rough reputation. It wasn't the family-friendly tourist destination it would eventually become. But standing beneath those neon lights, surrounded by noise and crowds, you knew you were somewhere special. You were in New York. If you wanted to experience everyday life, you had to take the subway. For millions of New Yorkers, it was simply part of life. You took it to work, to school, to visit friends, to explore another neighborhood. But the 1980s subway looked very different. Graffiti covered entire trains. Some stations were dark and worn. The trains shook through underground tunnels, and depending on where you traveled, you had to watch your surroundings. But those graffiti-covered trains were becoming a symbol of New York. To some people, graffiti was vandalism. To others, it was art. Young artists were turning trains, walls, and abandoned spaces into enormous canvases. The subway wasn't just transportation, it was part of New York culture. And above ground, another cultural revolution was taking place. Hip-hop was spreading rapidly. It had started years earlier in the Bronx, but during the 1980s, it was reaching a much larger audience. DJs created beats, MCs performed rhymes, breakdancers performed on sidewalks, graffiti artists painted trains and walls. Artists such as Run DMC and LL Cool J helped bring hip-hop into mainstream America. For young people, it wasn't simply music, it was identity. It was creativity. It was a way to tell stories. And New York was at the center of it all. Music was everywhere. But there was no Spotify, no YouTube, no streaming. If you wanted music, you bought a vinyl record or cassette. You could hold it, collect it, and show people what kind of music you loved. Then came MTV. Suddenly, musicians weren't just voices on the radio. They were visual stars. Michael Jackson, Madonna, Prince. Their music videos became major cultural events. Imagine being a teenager in New York. You might listen to a cassette on your boombox in the afternoon, then go home and watch MTV. The next day, everyone at school would be talking about the latest video. There was no social media, no viral TikTok clips. Culture moved slower, but when something became popular, it felt enormous. Fashion was just as noticeable. Big hair, bright colors, denim, leather jackets, sneakers, oversized clothing. New York streets became a giant showcase of different styles and cultures. But Manhattan wasn't the whole story. New York was a collection of neighborhoods. The Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, each had its own personality, its own restaurants, its own stores, its own music, its own stories. For ordinary New Yorkers, life wasn't about famous landmarks. It was about everyday moments, buying groceries, meeting friends, playing basketball, taking the subway, sitting on apartment steps, talking with neighbors, walking into the local deli. Millions of people were living different lives, but they were all part of the same enormous city. And every block had a story. Then there was the food. Pizza was everywhere. You could walk into a neighborhood pizzeria, order a slice, and eat it at the counter. Hot dogs came from street carts. Pretzels were sold on sidewalks. Delis served sandwiches. Diners offered burgers, eggs, coffee, and milkshakes. You didn't need an app. You didn't need an online reservation. You simply walked in, ordered, paid, and ate. A slice of pizza and a soda could be enough to make an ordinary afternoon memorable. When the sun went down, New York changed. Neon lights reflected off the streets. Taxi headlights moved through traffic. Bars filled with customers. Clubs opened their doors. Music spilled onto sidewalks. Restaurants stayed open late. The city never truly stopped, but nighttime also revealed the city's darker side. Crime was a serious concern. Drug-related violence affected communities. Some neighborhoods faced poverty and neglect. People learned to be cautious. New York could be thrilling, but it could also be intimidating. Sometimes those two feelings existed on the same street. Meanwhile, another New York was becoming incredibly powerful. Wall Street. During the 1980s, New York's financial industry was expanding rapidly. Stockbrokers worked long hours. Phones rang constantly. Men in suits rushed through lower Manhattan carrying briefcases. Money, ambition, competition, and risk became symbols of the decade. New York was a city of enormous contrasts. Someone could be struggling to pay rent on one street, while another person was making millions only a few blocks away. And above them stood one of the world's most famous skylines, the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, and the World Trade Center towers. The Twin Towers dominated lower Manhattan. People worked inside them. Tourists visited them. Photographers captured them. At the time, they were simply part of everyday New York. Nobody knew how deeply those towers would eventually become connected to American history. Now imagine spending an entire day in New York without a smartphone, because there weren't any. No Google Maps, no texting, no Instagram, no GPS. If you needed directions, you used a paper map. If you needed to call someone, you searched for a payphone. If you wanted photographs, you used a film camera. If you wanted a movie at home, you rented a VHS tape. And if you wanted music while walking through Manhattan, you carried a Walkman. Life moved differently. People talked face to face. They waited, they searched, they explored. And sometimes getting lost was simply part of the adventure. Now imagine you've spent the entire day walking through 1980s New York. You've heard the subway. You've walked beneath the neon lights of Times Square. You've watched graffiti-covered trains disappear underground. You've listened to music from a boombox. You've eaten a slice of pizza. You've watched yellow taxis race through Manhattan. And you've looked up at the Twin Towers, then suddenly you wake up. It's no longer 1984, it's today. The streets have changed, the technology has changed, Times Square is brighter, buildings have been renovated, music streams instantly, and millions of people carry tiny computers in their pockets. But somewhere beneath the modern city, the old New York still exists. In photographs, in movies, in music, in old subway cars, in forgotten storefronts, and in the memories of the people who lived through it. The 1980s weren't perfect. They were loud, difficult, creative, unpredictable, but they were uniquely New York. A city caught between the old world and the modern age. A city filled with artists, workers, immigrants, dreamers, musicians, businessmen, families, and millions of ordinary people. And perhaps that's why 1980s New York remains so fascinating. Because when we look back, we're not simply looking at an old city. We're looking at a moment that can never return. The neon signs changed, the buildings changed, the music changed, but the spirit of New York never disappeared. The energy, the ambition, the chaos, the endless movement, it's still there. This was New York in the 1980s, and for a few minutes we went back. This is Pastscape, where history isn't just remembered, it's revisited.